They have that tinfoil impact where they believe here and there and over here in these stars, and Canadian rights are being overridden.
This broad, unchecked provision opens the door to the possibility, Mr. Speaker, that mere words alone could lead to life imprisonment.
When the Liberal government tabled Bill C63 this past spring, we warned Canadians that it threatened our right to free speech while hiding under the pretense of being a bill to protect children from the ills of the internet. We've also told you that this bill has very little chance of passing, but that we should remain alert and be more concerned if Bill 63 progresses to second reading. On Monday, September 23rd, that's exactly what happened, and debate began in the House.
Let's take a look.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
It was 6. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise to speak to what I believe to be very positive legislation. And I suspect that if you were to canvass a vast majority of Canadians, they would recognize the issue that the Online Harm Act is dealing with as a very positive thing. And I'm a bit surprised in terms of the Conservative Party's approach to the legislation. It's important when you think of the Online Harms Act, the essence of what it is that the bill is attempting to recognize as issues. There are two categories, if I can put it that way, of what one would classify as harmful contact that is specifically being dealt with C63. The issue of intimate images communicated without consent, which includes sexually explicit deep fakes, Mr. Speaker. And the second one is content that sexually victimizes a child or re-victimizes a survivor.
Okay, so if that was all that was in Bill C63, we could kind of understand the talking points that this is a really good thing. The problem is Lammer even said it. Well, it's important not to worry about everything else that's in the bill.
Oh, of course not.
What's important is you worry about what we want you to focus on. And this is often the case with government legislation, whether it's actually in the United States or Canada or anywhere else. You see this often where bills are named certain things. So, for example, you'll name something, the Online Harms Act or, Bob's Jellyfish Act. And then what they'll do is they will put a whole bunch of other things in there that have nothing to do with the actual title of said bill.
Well, and as I said in the opening intro, they're trying to curtail our free speech under the guise of, this bill is going to help children who are affected by online predators.
And it's actually reprehensible that they are using children and the victimization of children in order to push this other agenda, because this other agenda, it is really scary stuff. It's laid out in the bill. It's
diabolical is what it is. It's because the average Canadian who's not doing the deep dive with us, they just hear, we're introducing an online harms bill to protect children against sexual predators online. The average Canadian's going to go, that sounds fantastic. We need better laws to protect kids, not realizing all the other garbage that's attached to this bill. And that's exactly what the Liberals are hoping. And then when they hear that the Conservatives are against this bill, well, the Liberals are going to run to the meeting and go, the Conservatives don't want to protect kids from online pornography. And then to the average Canadian who may not be doing this deep dive with us, they just hear that, oh my gosh, the Conservatives don't care about what happens to your kids online, not understanding the rest of the context.
Right. They clutch their chest and they mislead everybody. And
that's by design.
So if you haven't seen our dive into the Bill C63 legislation, there's going to be a link in the description check it out. It's important to familiarize yourself with it. Now, as scary as everything is in this bill, we still have a high level of confidence that this is not going to pass before the end of this government. And even if it does, the Conservatives will have it added to their repeal list shortly after they actually take power. So,
well, even if it gets through second reading and is on its way to committee, they're going to get flooded with briefs from Canadians everywhere about how we do not want this bill.
And they will also get flooded from lawyers everywhere and legal experts about all of the pitfalls and problems of this bill as well.
I would have thought that all members of this House would in fact support those initiatives. In fact, I have heard Conservatives across the way talk about concerns related to it and how offended they are about the issue and that government needs to do something. Well, now we have a piece of legislation before the House in which instead of just talking about it, Conservatives can actually do something about it. I was very surprised to read an editorial back in July with the Winnipeg Free Press. And to hear that the Conservative Party not only opposes the legislation, but if in fact we were able to get the legislation through the House, Mr. Speaker, that a Conservative government would actually repeal the legislation. They would repeal the law.
And this is where your confidence should be very high. And again, he's clutching his chest. Well, how could you be against children? That's not the problem, Lamoureux.
Right. This is exactly what we just finished saying, that the parts about, not being able to use hate speech online, which could be something as simple as, I hate the Liberal Party of Canada. They've destroyed my life.
Well,
to go to jail for the rest of your life for saying something like that, the Liberals are completely glossing over that part, and they're doing it on purpose.
Well, and the biggest problem with this bill is it doesn't define what this is. And it sets up these arbitrators, and like there's a lot of kangaroo court type of stuff that is put into this bill that would be horrifying if it actually became law.
Yeah, it operates outside the bounds of our criminal justice system.
I don't quite understand the logic behind that. And I hope during my 10-minute question and answers that a member of the Conservative Party would have the courage to explain to Canadians why it is that they would actually oppose this legislation. Let me read a couple of things from the Free Press article, Mr. Speaker. And I quote the article, and it's an editorial that was written July the 10th. And I want to quote the article because this is, the Free Press is very, very much apolitical and sticks to the facts. And I know the facts can be confusing for the Conservatives, but here's what they have to say. In the current era of partisan politics, makes reference to their leader, and others should recognize it is important to recognize a good idea when it comes along, whoever might pitch it. And this is still just an idea. The act has not passed, and the regulators have not been established. Given its unrealized state, makes reference then to the leader's dismissal is premature. A spokesperson for the leader said a common sense Conservative government would repeal the act. Well, let's take a look at the situation and determine the good sense of such a pledge. According to Stats Canada, between 2014 and 2022, there were 15,630 incidents of police reported online sexual offenses against children and 45,816 online incidents of child pornography. The overall rate of police-reported online child sexual exploitation incidents in Canada has risen to 160 incidents per 100,000 children between 2014 and 2022, a 217% increase. There were 219 reported online hate crime incidents in 2022, up from 92 4 years prior. Of those cyber-related hate crimes, 82% were violent. This legislation deals with the issues that are important to Canadians, and we have the Conservative Party saying no. Not only are they going to vote against it, but if it passes in the future, a quote-unquote common sense, I would suggest nonsense, Conservative government is going to get rid or repeal the law.
As they should.
Again, that's like saying, hey, we are going to ship you a whole bunch of Twinkies.
Nice.
Twinkies are great.
They are.
They're going to send you Twinkies, and then the other thing that we're going to send you is a whole bunch of Kit Kat bars. Now, what we're not going to tell you is that we're also going to be shipping a whole bunch of arsenic, and we're going to be sending you a whole bunch of anthrax as well. So, but don't worry about that. Look at the Twinkies and look at the Kit Kat bars. Well, I don't want that. How could you say no to Kit Kat bars and Twinkies? What kind of a person are you? Well, I don't want the anthrax, but the Twinkies.
That's pretty much what Lemmer is doing here. He's because again, part of the bill, I think most Canadians would look at that and go, yeah, I think kids should be protected against online sexual predators. I don't think anybody would question that. That's the good part of the bill. The bad part of the bill is all the rest of it with the online hate speech. Again, if I say I hate the Liberal Party of Canada, like, am I going to end up in jail for the rest of my life?
Well, that's the thing. And it doesn't put any statute of limitations on it. So something that you said 10 years ago, someone could all of a sudden find a problem with, and you could potentially go to jail for life.
They have laws like this in the UK. And if you look them up, like, look up some YouTube videos about it. It's not good. There was a woman who had to do community service because she posted some lyrics to a song after her friend had died that had some explicit words in it. A complaint was put in, and she was sentenced. She has a criminal record now. She was able to get off with community service, but she has a criminal record now for posting lyrics to a song that contained explicit words. Like, how is that in anybody's mind? How is that just? How is that acceptable?
And this is the problem with the left.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The one for Renford Pembroke. I'll get it right now.
Close enough, Mr. Speaker. They're going to be changing the name just as soon as you get it right anyhow. The member opposite asked, he said he was trying to pose a question to the opposition, what he wants us to explain. Well, Mr. Speaker, he'll get his chance when he's sitting in opposition to ask questions of the government. The reason we don't have any confidence in C63 is they will be choosing the censors. And this government has failed at everything it has attempted to do. The people have lost confidence in any boards that this government appoints. The latest being what we're hearing on SCTC. We do have a bill, C412, that does protect children. It actually zeroes in on the protection of children and has specific measures to take to protect them from viewing material they should not be seeing online.
And there we go. As predicted, that announcement that Michelle Rumpel-Garner had made just a few days before the House sat again for the fall session, it was directly related to this, as I had suspected.
Right. And now we haven't taken a look at that bill yet, so we can't really comment on it. Is there any anthrax underneath the Twinkies? We don't know. This is, if it does what they say it does on the tin, then that's what you need. You need something that specifically targets it. Because again, there's lots of existing legislation that will address the problems. All you need is additional legislation to fill in the gaps. That's what you need to happen.
We need harsher sentences for people who abuse children online.
Well, and the other thing that you need is you need to actually have some legislation to force the social media platforms to put in some controls so parents can be more involved. And that's actually some of the core principles that I wrote in my brief when I sent that in response to S210, which was another, online harms act that is trying to protect children and everything like that. The problem is the way it went about it was it almost threatened to create a digital identification, and that is not good. And age verification, it implied that they would use government sources to verify that. That's not good, especially when you're talking about adult content sites. Not good at all. So it sounds like, based on all of the briefs and the evidence that was submitted, the Conservatives took that and they said, okay, understood, and they created their own House bill instead of relying on the Senate bill. So we'll see what happens.
And all my apologies to the Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess that's two reasons why now the Conservatives are actually opposing the legislation. They have that that far right element. They, I want to be a little bit kind here. That have that tinfoil impact, where they believe here and there and there and over here in these stars, and Canadian rights are being overridden.
They are being overridden. It's not some tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. You can actually go online right now to ourcommons.ca, search for Bill C63, and you can read it for yourself. And to save you the trouble, we've put a link to it in the description.
And this is a guy who is speaking for the same government that invoked the Emergencies Act for the only time in the country's history, arrested peaceful protesters, seized their bank accounts, and took all of their money. And he's trying to say, no one's freedoms are being trodden on, it's conspiracy theories. This is called gaslighting.
There's nothing to it. I can assure the member opposite. She does not have to be fearful. This is not an attack on the far right. This is legislation, Mr. Speaker, that a vast majority of Canadians, in fact, would support. Does she not realize that by voting against this legislation, she's voting against protecting a child? She's voting against intimate sexual exploitation through the uploading of pictures onto the internet. This is legislation that is going to save people in many different ways. It's there to protect people that have been exploited, Mr. Speaker, and our children. How can the Conservatives not vote for it? I hope it's not to deal with censorship, as the member opposite tries to say and justify her voting action.
It's absolutely got to do with censorship. You can read it in the bill. I mean, you can go back and watch our video about it where we read it in the bill. This, again, it's really two bills in one. It's the bill to do with protecting children against online pornographic material, and it's also a bill for censorship of not just the far right, but every Canadian citizen. Or you know what? Maybe not every Canadian citizen, because I bet they'll pick and choose the ones that they want to censor.
Well, and this is the problem. This is the problem with not defining things in the bill, because what could happen is they could, give this over to the regulatory body that they want to spend $20 million on. Again, let's bloat the public service even more than it already is. And then they could say, okay, you know what? It classifies as hate speech anything that speaks against the platform of the Liberal government. They could do that. And then that becomes law. And then anybody that says anything bad about the Liberal government, we would be thrown in jail.
Oh, for sure. I do want to kind of pull it back for a second, though. Number one, we don't think that this is going to have enough time to pass through the House until the next election, even if that election were not until next October. Number two, even if it does receive royal assent, there's a period called draft legislation. So that's after it's received royal assent, but before it's actually practically being enforced. And it's that period of time where they would hire the censors, they would figure out how are we going to do this, and it can be a year or more. Sometimes the government will pass a bill, it receives royal assent, and it doesn't go to the draft legislation right away. An example of this is Bill C11 that's currently happening. Or perhaps a C18.
No, it's C11.
No, it was C11. Okay. But like sometimes they'll pass a bill and it'll receive royal assent, but it won't actually be implemented. So I have a feeling that this is going to be one of those bills. Again, it's not a reason to let our guard down, but like don't be losing sleep over it just yet.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Brantford Brant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I proudly rise in opposition today to Bill C63. Canadians, I know it's a shock to the member opposite. Canadians take pride, Mr. Speaker, in living in a nation where justice prevails, freedoms are upheld, and our most vulnerable, especially our children, are protected. Yet today, after 9 years of this failed government, crime is rising, leaving families across the country concerned for the safety of their loved ones, both on the streets and online. Online criminal activity continues to surge, but the Liberals' response has been to push censorship bills that force Canadians into a false choice between their safety and free expression. Instead of addressing the real issues, this Liberal legislation silences Canadians under the guise of security, creating bloated bureaucracies led by the Prime Minister's hand-picked allies. Canadians are bearing the brunt of this government's failures. Bill C63 introduces a dangerous new provision, an offence motivated by hatred, which could impose a life sentence for even minor infractions under any act of Parliament. This broad, unchecked provision opens the door to the possibility, Mr. Speaker, that mere words alone could lead to life imprisonment. While the government claims that a serious underlying act must occur for this punishment to apply, that is simply not reflected in the text of the bill.
I can't even tell you how happy I was to see that Larry Brock is debating this bill.
Yeah, because he knows the law. He has had to prosecute people based on the law. So he knows how to dig into this stuff.
Not just that, but during one of the interviews that we had with Mr. Brock, I had expressed concern about Bill C63. I'm really happy that he's the one that's out there defending us against it.
Well, and he's actually reflecting a lot of what our explanation was in our previous video about C63 and what we zeroed in on in terms of the fact that people can go to jail for life based on this. And it also highlights the fact in his statement that it's so important as to what is in the bill as well as what is not in the bill. So the government is saying, oh, well, you must do something really serious. Well, if that's not in the bill, then guess what? Then you can say it all you want, but that doesn't make it so. The bill basically says you can go to jail for life. It doesn't say you must do something serious. It only says you can go to jail for life as one of the repercussions of this. Some of the other repercussions are paying tens of thousands of dollars as well. So this is very, very important what Larry Brock is saying right here.
Section 320 of the Criminal Code would be amended to state, quote, everyone who commits an offence under this Act or any other Act of Parliament is guilty of an indictable offence and liable to imprisonment for life, end of quotes. Laws to address the issues we're witnessing have been in place for decades, and the Supreme Court has ruled on them multiple times. We don't need new laws to govern hate speech. This government needs to grow a backbone and enforce the laws as they stand. Earlier this year at the Justice Committee, the Justice Minister openly admitted that Bill C63's new hate crime offence could apply to any offence, as long as it's hate motivated. He said the bill's sentencing range covers everything from minor to serious crimes.
And who decides that the action is hate related?
Well, it's not a judge, I can tell you that.
So
it's not a jury of your peers either. It's their censors.
This is the issue, okay? This is the issue. So this isn't just the Online Harms Act, okay? This is any crime that is deemed hate-related would dovetail into this new legislation where you could be sentenced to jail for life.
Like, you know, there's a reason we keep the book 1984 on our bookshelf. And that reason is to remind us of what can happen if ordinary people don't stand up.
But that judges, handpicked by this government, will make sure minor offenses don't receive harsh sentences. However, by leaving this to the courts, this government is being reckless. We can't rely on vague promises that the judiciary will fix a poorly drafted bill. Parliament needs to clearly define when a life sentence should apply, not hand over broad and unchecked power. This bill risks extreme punishments for minor infractions. As stated by a political commentator, the Liberals are using the guillotine of speech violations, and on the other hand, house arrest for career criminals roaming the streets exploiting a broken bail system.
And I don't think we could sum it up any better. I don't think we said that, but it sounds smart.
I definitely wasn't us.
So that's probably why we didn't say it. So anyhow, but this is the thing. It's ridiculous. You have people that are committing violent offenses being let out on bail the same day, yet they want to throw people in jail for life if they say, I hate the Liberal Party.
I hate Justin Trudeau. I hate Chrystia Freeland. I hate anybody on that side of the house. Like, gosh, I hope this doesn't pass and then they don't come after me 2 years from now for saying all those things.
Right?
Only in Canada would that bizarre statement have application. Widespread concern from all sides of the political spectrum have been raised about Bill C63's introduction of a so-called hate crime peace bond, with many labeling it as a pre-crime measure for speech. The problem lies in the fact that this provision would extend the power to issue peace bonds based solely on speech-related offenses without clearly defining what constitutes such crimes or ensuring that they meet the criminal standard for hate. While the Liberals focus on banning opinions that challenge the Prime Minister's ideology, Conservatives are dedicated to keeping Canadians safe, both online and offline, while also at the same point upholding and defending their civil liberties, a concept that's completely unknown to this government. This is why my colleague, the member for Calgary Nose Hill, introduced Bill C412. Bill C412 is designed to protect Canadians online through three key areas: protection from online criminal harassment, safeguarding our children, and ensuring user privacy. C412 aims to empower victims of online criminal harassment who currently have limited options for quickly and permanently ending their harassment. This legislation would allow victims to apply to a judge to identify their harasser, end the harassment, and then impose conditions to stop it as deemed appropriate by a court. It also provides legal clarity regarding when online operators, such as social media platforms, must disclose the identity of an alleged abuser. Additionally, the legislation introduces an aggravating factor for perpetrators who repeatedly send harassment anonymously using multiple burner accounts. These measures are designed to streamline the process for victims to interact with law enforcement and receive effective protections, ultimately enabling law enforcement to de-escalate violence in a timely manner.
So some of that is actually very good, because one of the common things that you'll hear from law enforcement is, we don't have tools to deal with this. Now, this would potentially start to introduce tools in order to deal with this, and the tool is legislation that would force the social media company to actually disclose the identity of the person that is sending said message, which they don't have to do today.
Well, and interestingly, there have been some studies done that show that people are harsher or more aggressive when they're anonymous. So maybe even just the threat of that, people would think twice before sending, harassing messages.
Yeah, because most people who are aggressive online, they don't act that way when they're in the real world. So hopefully it gives them a bit more pause when they're actually about to take these sorts of actions online.
Yeah, am I going to act like a jerk online? Well, what if my job finds out? What if the police find out and come knocking on my door? What if? Maybe just the threat of that what if is enough to make you think twice about doing it.
In contrast, the Liberals' Bill C63 contains no such provisions, representing a significant flaw for a bill that purports to protect Canadians from online harm. Online harassment is widespread and often anonymous, yet our current laws are outdated, and Bill C63 fails to provide on this front. In addition, Bill C63 fails our children by delaying protections and relying on an unclear regulatory process. In contrast, Bill C412 takes proactive measures by imposing a clear duty of care on online operators. The bill seeks to establish a novel set of checks and balances between the government, operators, and parents to keep children safe online. Under C412, existing government regulators, law enforcement, and the judiciary will ensure operators follow their duty of care to keep kids safe online. Operators would be formally required to ensure they keep kids safe under a clear set of guidelines. Parents then would have all the tools needed to understand what their kids are doing online and then make informed decisions about what types of permissions to give them for their online use.
Hey, that sounds like a brief you wrote.
That sounds exactly like a brief that I wrote. Because one of the main tenets in my brief, and maybe I'll read the brief on one of these live streams coming up, but it was to the fact that parents are the ones that should be responsible for their kids, and they should be involved in their kids. One of the problems that we see is that devices and the internet are being used as a babysitter for these kids, and parents are not actively engaged with that. Well, they need to be. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? The social media platforms have to give parents tools in order to do that. And that's exactly what he's talking about.
Well, and I think parents need to also be taught how to do that on their own home systems, like, set your router in a certain way that you can turn off adult sites and that sort of thing.
It provides parents with tools to protect their children online through non-invasive age verification methods and enforces these protections with steep penalties for non-compliance. Bill C412 specifically safeguards children against physical harm, bullying, sexual violence, and harmful online content. C412 offers a balanced solution that emphasizes privacy, preserving age verification methods, while explicitly prohibiting the use of digital IDs.
I swear they read my brief.
Maybe they did.
Or they're just really smart and,
Well, what's the saying? Great minds think alike, but
yeah.
Idiots seldom differ.
But this is like almost like point for point what was in my brief. So I don't even care if they read it or not. What I care about is the fact that the concerns that I actually raised are being addressed, because It was digital ID. It was privacy. It was what if there's a data breach? And, you know, despite the fact that no laws are being broken, you're going to be losing all that information. And giving parents the tools to actually take care of their kids, not absolving them of the responsibility to. So all of these points are what I discussed, and it's nice to hear that they're addressing them.
Well, it sounds like they may have consulted an IT professional, right? Which is what you want when you're making a bill like this. No doubt when it gets to committee, not necessarily C63, but when the Conservatives take government and retable their bill, when that gets to committee, no doubt that they're going to be calling IT professionals in and asking for their opinions on things like security.
They better.
Many Canadians are concerned about privacy and the misuse of digital IDs. Bill C412 ensures that digital identifiers cannot be used for age verification. Meanwhile, Bill C63 leaves privacy concerns unaddressed and lacks clear prohibitions against the misuse of digital IDs. Bill C63's vague regulatory framework allows for excessive bureaucratic oversight, creating opportunities for tech lobbyists to manipulate the process behind closed doors. Instead of providing immediate protections, it pushes key decisions into an opaque regulatory future, prioritizing the interests of big tech over the safety and well-being of Canadian families. By failing to effectively tackle online harassment and leaving significant gaps in protections, Bill 63 reflects a government more concerned about creating a facade of action than genuinely, actively safeguarding Canadians' rights and safety. Bill 63 seeks to reinstate Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, a provision, Mr. Speaker, that was removed by the Harper government, and even the Toronto Star, hardly a cheerleader for the Conservative Party of Canada, has deemed unnecessary for protecting Canadians from hate speech. Section 13, which was previously repealed for its overly broad and subjective application, allowed the government to censor speech without the need for criminal proceedings. Reintroducing this section would open the door to an extrajudicial system where vague definitions of hate speech could lead to a chilling effect on free speech. The new Section 13 would make communication of hate speech by anyone on the internet or other means of telecommunication subject to the jurisdiction of the Canadian Human Rights Complaints Mechanism. Standard of proof, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, an extremely high standard, but merely a balance of probability, 50.01%. This is not only dangerous, but deeply flawed, as we've already seen the consequences when the Liberals attempted to appoint an arbiter under C63, who had previously argued that, quote, terror was not an irrational approach, end of quote. This highlights the inherent risks in giving unchecked power to unelected individuals who may interpret free speech in ways that suppress legitimate voices. Section 13 would also pave the way for dangerous precedents like life sentences for hate crimes without proper legal thresholds. The Liberals have failed to provide evidence that such extreme measures would be effective in preventing hate when the laws we already have are not being enforced. We need to hear from legal experts and civil liberty groups to understand the unintended consequences that this could bring. What we really need, Mr. Speaker, is action. Action today, not years from now, and not censorship, which is exactly what C63 does. The government should focus on enforcing existing laws and protecting ethnic minority groups by empowering the RCMP, the INSCT, and NSES to work collaboratively and quickly with local police forces and share intelligence to protect vulnerable communities. Directing CSIS to implement threat reduction measures and communicate threats to ethnic minority groups. To ensure the security infrastructure program provides real, timely funding to help community centers improve security. Rather than reintroducing Section 13 and limiting free speech, the government should enforce current laws and take meaningful action to protect Canadians. Mr. Speaker, it's no surprise that the Justice Minister is proud of the only piece of legislation he's managed to introduce since his appointment. Meanwhile, contrasts to the Conservative Party of Canada, who put forward 10 bills that offer real solutions to the issues Canadians face today. Even the Justice Minister himself, the bill's biggest advocate, the cheerleader to this failed Liberal government, admitted that it would take years for this bureaucracy to create and enforce regulations. Let that sink in. This widely hailed, very, very important piece of legislation is not going to protect families for years to come. That's the impact of this government.
And that's a really good point. And I think this is why we've been told that even if this bill gets passed, you will not see it enforced for quite some time.
Right, because they're so incompetent, they can't get anything done.
Now, you know, that's a good thing that, God forbid, this bill gets passed, that, you know, it's not going to actually come into force for a while. But it's still concerning that the Liberals are trying to pass a law like this, and we shouldn't let our guard down and just be like, oh, well, you know, by the time it actually is enforced, the Conservatives will come along and repeal it. We shouldn't take that chance, right? Yes, the Conservatives are up like 20 points right now, but we shouldn't take anything for granted. And that's why it's important that we learn as much about this bill as possible, that we contact our MPs about it and tell them we don't want this bill, and that when it does come time for us to write briefs in committee, that we all write a brief.
Well, and again, it's important to let your member of parliament know whenever you really strongly agree with something or you disagree with something, because then they start to get a sense of what the pulse of Canadians are.
Well, and you don't even have to write like some big, huge, long email.
Right.
You can just say to your MP, you know, I really disagree with Bill C63. I think it's dangerous because of X, Y, and Z. Please don't vote for it. You might not get a response, but I can promise you, after speaking with many politicians and also many staffers, that they are reading it.
Announcements, no effective follow-through. According to his own logic, millions of taxpayer dollars will be wasted long before any meaningful protection or enforcement are put in place. Canadians deserve better than half-hearted reforms. They need a government committed to real accountability and actionable solutions. It's time for the minister to stop hiding behind buzzwords and start delivering results that protect Canadians day in and day out. As Shadow Minister for Justice, I stand firm in criminalizing and enforcing laws that protect our most vulnerable, our children. We must criminalize and enforce penalties against those who victimize children online or bully them digitally. We must punish those who induce self-harm or incite violence in minors. We must ensure strict bans on distributing intimate content without consent, including the rise of deepfakes. My Conservative colleagues and I believe these serious crimes must be investigated by police, tried in court, and result in a jail sentence. We will not support the creation of bureaucratic offices that do nothing to prevent crime or bring justice to victims. A conservative government will protect our children and punish those who prey on them, not create more red tape. This past summer, the PBO revealed the cost of the Liberal government's Online Harms Act that would cost $200 million to create a new 330-person bureaucracy to enforce rules. Yeah, let that sink in. $200 million upfront, no protection, to create more work for a bloated bureaucracy. Rules that are still undefined.
You know, I think I said $20 million earlier, and I was just taking Kevin Lammer at his word. $200 million. Gee, that's interesting.
$200 million to throw people in jail for Facebook posts.
Well, it seems like they spend the same amount to administrate any new program or any new department, because that's the exact same amount it costs the government to administrate the carbon tax as well.
Interestingly, it's also the amount of money that they actually save by putting the Senate chamber in the train station down the street instead of in the courtyard of East Block.
Canadians can't wait for 5 years, I say in retort to that question. This raises serious concerns about transparency, efficiency, and the potential impact on free speech. Even worse, this $200 million doesn't cover the additional workload for the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which will have to manage a surge of complaints about social media posts in today's cancel culture. The government has no estimate of how many complaints the Commission might receive, so it's very likely that the $200 million is just the beginning. To put that in perspective, the PBO's numbers reveal that the bureaucracy created solely by Bill C63 will be about 1/3 larger than the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the agency responsible for ensuring the safety of Canadians in the air and on the roads. Additionally, the PBO's analysis shows that on a per capita basis, this new bureaucracy will be vastly larger than any comparable agency in other peer countries. Bill 63 should be scrapped just on the basis for its wasteful cost.
It's kind of jarring, because the way it's being described is sounding a lot like the Ministry of Truth.
Well, it is the Ministry of Truth, because the Liberals don't want podcasts like ours getting out there. They don't want Canadians educated and knowledgeable about what's actually happening in government. They want the populace to believe their lies so that they keep getting reelected. That's what they want.
Right. So this is where, everyone needs to pay attention to their government, no matter who's in office, because tyranny is allowed to thrive when the populace is not paying attention.
It's absurd that while Liberals underfund the RCMP, leaving almost 1/3 of cybercrime positions vacant, they're proposing to dump $200 million and hire 300 staff for a vague new bureaucracy. I see that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move to my conclusion. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are rightly concerned. In this digital age, we must strike a balance between protecting individuals from harmful content and safeguarding their rights. That's why the Conservative Party is committed to delivering common sense solutions that protect our children and ensure their safety online without compromising the freedoms we hold dear. The bottom line is that Canadians are living in fear due to online harassment, and it's costing lives. They need real protection, not more Liberal delays and incompetence. The Liberals should adopt the common sense solutions in Bill C412 or call an immediate election and let Canadians choose real, immediate protections or another costly Liberal censorship scheme. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Attorney General for Canada.
The member opposite for his comments, and as a former Crown prosecutor, he would know full well that what is contemplated in this law is taking current jurisprudence that applies in the physical world and applying it in the online world. Some of that jurisprudence is the Keekstra and Whatcott definition of hatred that my colleague would be familiar with. Secondly, he talked about the potential for disproportionate penalties. I would, for his edification, point him to the very criminal code that he used to apply as a Crown prosecutor, which talks about all sentences need to be fit, meaning fit to the gravity of a person's responsibility and to the nature of the offense. That's 718.1. But what I'll put to him is that we've heard tremendous support for this legislation from all sectors of society, including CJA, that has called for more strict penalties for hate propaganda, prompting them to get behind this bill. What I would say to him is that when law enforcement and victims' families are talking to me and our government about the fact that they can't get a handle on this issue, because even when their children take their own lives, the victimization of the family continues after death, they ask for one thing and one thing only, which is that the images be taken down. That is what this bill will do. It will take down the images and reduce those from circulating online that abuse children. Does the member opposite agree that that simple proposition is answering the calls from Carol Todd, Amanda Todd's mother?
So there's a few issues with what he said. If you're not familiar with the lady he said at the end, Carol Todd. Carol Todd is a advocate for reduction in online harms. Her daughter unfortunately took her own life after being
she was exploited is what it was.
Yeah, she was. She was a young teenager.
I think she was 15 and she had shared an intimate photo of herself with someone who she thought she could trust, was pretending to be somebody who he was not, and then continued to exploit her using that photo.
Yes, because he blackmailed her into continuing to, do more and more things. And this is the issue. But, this is the other issue where kids are not protected and parents don't have the tools in order to protect them, because parents can only be around their kids for so long. Kids are in school, kids are hanging out with other kids. So they need more tools in order to do this. Now, the other thing that he was talking about was the fact that, the sentence has to fit the crime. Well, here's the problem, Verani. You have these other crimes, and there is a sentence limitation to them. It's sentences can include, up to X amount of years, or up to X amount of months, or up to X amount of fines. You're basically saying murder 1 is the sentence limitation for hate crimes.
And hate crimes, again, can be just as simple as saying, I hate Justin Trudeau. Like you're not hurting anybody physically, right? You're expressing a thought. It's a thought crime.
And who decides what is hate? That's the problem.
Right.
And he said, well, there's these agencies that are saying, we need to do more to and impose strict sentences for hate propaganda. Who decides what that is? That's the issue. And then you say, and it'll also take all of this stuff down. So this does two things. It puts people in jail for alleged quote unquote hate crimes, whatever hate means. And then it removes any of the ideas that are deemed as hateful.
It censors them. It erases them. I'm not all for having, lewd images of people floating around online if they don't want them there. But unfortunately, once you put something online, it's there for life. So some responsibility needs to be taken upon the individuals as well, that maybe I'm not going to share those photos of myself. Or, for example, we don't put photos of our son on our Facebook because we don't want his photo out there. We feel it's an invasion of his privacy. I know a lot of people put photos of their own kids online, but we've just made the decision that we don't want photos of him online. If we want to share it with a family member, we'll share it with them directly. We don't just kind of plaster it online for anyone and everyone to see and do what they want with.
Right. When he's old enough, and if he wants to post a picture online of himself, and we agree that he has the maturity to be able to do that, then he can do that. He can start to make his own decisions. But, until then, that's our rules. And we're not saying that those rules should apply to everybody else. That's the rules that we have.
Yeah, those are the ones that we've decided on for our son's safety and for his privacy. I think as a society, we're kind of irresponsible when it comes to the internet. And I think maybe talking about this in depth with each other, or just exploring different ideas of what can I do to keep myself safe online? What can I do to keep my children safe online? How can I prevent scams, et cetera, et cetera? I think those are discussions that we need to have.
Well, and just quickly, I was bullied a lot when I was young. Tanya was also bullied to a good degree. But when I was growing up, I took solace in the fact that when I got on the school bus and went home, I was safe. Nobody could bully me anymore. Now, the next day at school, that was a different story, but at least I had this window where I could feel safe. Now, it follows you. It follows you online through social media, and it continues. Notification, notification, notification. So we have to be careful about what the impact is on our kids. And this is why we also have to be careful of when we give kids a device that can actually connect to the internet and the implications of what all of that means. And we have to give parents the tools in order to protect their kids, which leads us all the way back around to what Mr. Brock is talking about. Because the government's proposal is, our solution was going to create a brand new agency, and these are the people that you call, and you won't even have to go through the courts through them, and we're not going to give you any tools at all to deal with it yourself. We're just going to throw everybody in jail.
Well, and that's just it. We have to give our kids, and ourselves really, but especially our kids, the tools to deal with it, themselves, to say, it's okay for you to shut that computer off and walk away.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Well, there was much to that particular question. Let me state at the outset that the minister indicates very forcefully that why would the Conservatives be opposed in removing that material? Of course we are not. But Bill 63 talks about it being taken down, not immediately, being taken down after a complaint, after it's reviewed, and within 24 hours. That's insufficient, Mr. Speaker. He also talks about all the various groups that have applauded the government's Bill C63. I could literally spend another 20 minutes talking about public interest groups, very key individuals in the legal field who have spoken so against Bill 63 as another form of censorship by this particular government. So there is no balance, is what I'm trying to say, Mr. Speaker. Zero balance protecting the rights of Canadian families and the children and protecting our civil liberties. C412 does exactly that.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député Berthier.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech, and I appreciate how serious his comments were. Now, we all share the same concern about protecting the public, about taking down non-consenting images and also child pornography. He also referred to a number of other bills in his speech, C412, if I'm not mistaken. So my colleague who's so well versed on this topic, my question is, would it be possible to work on C63 and at the same time make proposals that might go to the bill that he also referred to so that it's all more effective and efficient? Because he had some very specific comments about certain things. Is there any way we can work on this in committee, and will he undertake to do that?
So the issue is that you would almost have to gut C63. There's so much wrong with it.
Right, which is why the Conservatives have put forward Bill C412, because it's the alternative, right? It's the alternative without all the censorship.
It would almost be simpler to take the good stuff from C63, potentially. Again, we haven't read C412. I'm just taking Brock at his word. Once we read it, our opinion may change, but let's just take him at his word. It may be simpler to take the good stuff from C63 and put it into 412 than the reverse, which is what the block is suggesting. And I'm not suggesting that the block's idea is a bad idea. It's actually a good idea. He has the bills, in reverse of what should be looked at here.
Well, I suspect that the good stuff from Bill C63 is already in Bill C412.
Probably.